The church bells tolled, each chime a hammer against Elias Carter's chest, pulling him back to a memory he'd buried for 40 years. At 17, he'd stood in his mother's kitchen, heart pounding, and whispered, "I'm gay." Her scream still echoed in his skull. She'd collapsed, clutching her chest, as if his truth had torn her apart. Now, at 60, Elias stood outside the funeral home in San Francisco's Mission District, the weight of his father's death pressing down like the fog rolling over the bay. The hearse gleamed under the setting sun, a silent witness to the life he'd lived in shadows. For decades, he'd honored his mother's plea to stay quiet, to be the son she could bear to look at. But today, at his father's funeral, something inside him stirred, a spark of defiance, a need to be free. Elias adjusted his tie, the black fabric stiff against his throat. He'd spent his life blending in, a high school history teacher who never spoke of love, who never dared bring a date to family dinners. His father, Harold, a stoic mechanic with calloused hands and a heart hardened by years of providing, had never asked. His mother, Lorraine, had made it clear after that day in the kitchen. His truth was a wound she couldn't survive. So Elias had locked it away, choosing her peace over his own. The funeral home's doors swung open, and a young man stepped out, Jamie Torres, the funeral director's assistant. He was in his 30s, with dark curls and a warmth in his brown eyes that made Elias's breath catch. Jamie's rainbow pin glinted on his jacket, a quiet declaration in a world that still judged. "Mr. Carter," Jamie said softly, his voice steady but kind. "We're ready to begin whenever you are." Elias nodded, his throat tight. He hadn't expected Jamie's presence to unsettle him, to make him feel seen in a way he hadn't allowed himself in decades. As they walked inside, the scent of lilies and polished wood filled the air. The chapel was small, filled with faces Elias barely recognized, distant cousins, old neighbors, people who'd known Harold, but not the man Elias had become. His sister, Clara, sat in the front row, her eyes red but her posture rigid. She'd always known, even when he didn't say it, but they'd never spoken of it. Silence was the Carter family creed. The service began, and Elias sat stiffly, listening to the pastor's generic eulogy. Harold had been a good man, dependable, but distant. Elias had loved him, but they'd never connected, not really. As the pastor droned on, Elias's mind drifted to the last time he'd seen his father alive, a month ago at the hospital. Harold had gripped his hand, his voice raspy. "You're a good son, Eli. Don't let anyone tell you different." The words had haunted Elias since, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. After the service, Jamie approached again, carrying a small urn. "Your father's ashes," he said, his voice gentle. "Would you like to take them now, or should we hold them for you?" Elias stared at the urn, his father reduced to a handful of dust. He felt the weight of 40 years of silence pressing down, the life he hadn't lived, the love he hadn't claimed. "I'll take them," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As Jamie handed over the urn, their fingers brushed, and Elias's heart stuttered. Jamie's eyes held his for a moment, soft but searching, as if he could see the storm inside Elias. "If you need to talk," Jamie said, "I'm here. Not just for the funeral stuff. For anything." Elias swallowed hard, nodding, unable to trust his voice. He hadn't been offered kindness like that in years, and it felt like a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. Outside, the crowd dispersed, and Clara pulled Elias aside. "You okay, Eli?" she asked, her voice low. She was 5 years younger, a lawyer now, sharp and protective. "You've been quiet. Even for you." Elias forced a smile. "Just saying goodbye." She studied him, her eyes narrowing. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know." Hiding. Her words cut deep, and he looked away, clutching the urn tighter. That night, Elias sat alone in his small apartment, the urn on the coffee table. He poured a glass of whiskey, his father's drink, and stared at the amber liquid. Memories flooded back, his mother's collapse, his father's silence, the years he'd spent shrinking himself to fit their expectations. But Harold's last words echoed louder. "You're a good son." For the first time, Elias wondered if his father had known, had seen him, and still loved him. The next morning, Elias returned to the funeral home to finalize paperwork. Jamie was there, sorting files, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a tattoo of a phoenix on his forearm. Back so soon? Jamie teased, his smile easy. Elias managed a small laugh, surprising himself. Just tying up loose ends. But as they talked, about the weather, the city, anything but death, Elias felt something shift. Jamie's openness, his unapologetic authenticity, was a mirror to the life Elias had denied himself. Ever been to the Castro? Jamie asked suddenly, referring to San Francisco's historic gay district. Elias shook his head, his chest tightening. You should, Jamie said. It's freeing. Maybe you'd like it. The invitation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Elias wanted to say yes, to step into that world, but fear clawed at him. He'd spent 40 years silent. Could he really start now? As he left the funeral home, Elias glanced back at Jamie, who was watching him with that same gentle intensity. For the first time in decades, Elias felt the stirrings of possibility, a chance to reclaim the truth he'd buried. His father was gone, his mother long since passed, and the weight of their expectations was lifting. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to speak. The San Francisco fog clung to the streets like a shroud as Elias drove toward the Castro, Jamie's words echoing in his mind. He hadn't planned to go. Not today, not ever. But something about the way Jamie had said freeing had lodged itself in his chest, refusing to let go. At 60, Elias felt like a teenager again, heart racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration, as he parked near a rainbow-striped crosswalk. The Castro buzzed with life. Bars spilled laughter onto the sidewalks, rainbow flags fluttered above shop windows, and couples, men with men, women with women, walked hand in hand, unashamed. Elias stood frozen, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He'd spent his life avoiding places like this, convinced they were for others, not him. But the energy here was undeniable, a pulse of acceptance that made his throat ache. He wandered into a small bookstore, its shelves lined with queer literature and history. A young clerk with bright blue hair smiled at him. Looking for something specific? They asked. Elias shook his head, mumbling, just browsing. But his eyes caught on a memoir titled Out of the Shadows, its cover featuring a man standing in a beam of light. The image hit him like a punch. He'd been in the shadows his whole life. As he flipped through the book, a familiar voice broke his thoughts. Didn't expect to see you here. Jamie stood at the end of the aisle, holding a coffee cup, his rainbow pin catching the light. Elias's heart skipped, and he fumbled the book, nearly dropping it. I just wanted to see it, he said, gesturing vaguely at the street outside. Jamie's smile was soft, knowing. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? But it's home for a lot of us. They stepped outside, and Jamie offered to show him around. As they walked, Jamie talked about the Castro's history, the activism, the struggles, the triumphs. Elias listened, captivated by Jamie's passion, his ease in his own skin. I came out when I was 16, Jamie said, his voice casual but laced with pride. My mom threw a party. Said she always knew. Elias's chest tightened. He tried to imagine Lorraine throwing a party for him, but all he could see was her crumpled on the kitchen floor. They stopped at a mural, a vibrant tribute to queer icons like Harvey Milk. Jamie's eyes lit up as he spoke about Milk's courage, his fight for visibility. He made it okay for people like us to exist, Jamie said, to love who we love. Elias wanted to ask what that felt like, to love openly, to exist without fear, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, I wish I'd been braver. Jamie turned to him, his gaze steady. It's not about being brave all at once. It's about starting where you are. The words landed like a key in a lock, and Elias felt something loosen inside him. For the first time, he wondered if it wasn't too late to start. That evening, Elias sat with Clara at her apartment, a cozy place filled with books and photos of her kids. She poured him wine, her eyes searching his face. You went to the Castro today, didn't you? She said, not a question. Elias froze, then nodded. How'd you know? Clara smirked. You've got that look, like you're waking up. She leaned forward, her voice softening. Eli, you don't have to keep punishing yourself for Mom. She was wrong to make you feel like your truth was a burden. Elias stared into his glass, the wine trembling in his hand. I didn't want to hurt her again. Or Dad. Clara reached for his hand. Dad knew, Eli. He never said it, but he knew. And he loved you. Why do you think he said what he did at the hospital? Elias's eyes burned, and he blinked hard, trying to hold back the tears. Clara squeezed his hand. You deserve to live, Eli. Really live. The next day, Elias found himself back at the funeral home, drawn to Jamie like a moth to a flame. Jamie was in the garden out back, tending to a small plot of roses. You're becoming a regular, Jamie teased, brushing dirt from his hands. Elias laughed, the sound rusty but real. Guess I am. They talked for hours, about music, books, the city they both loved. Jamie shared stories of his first boyfriend, his coming-out party, the freedom he'd fought for. Elias listened, hungry for every word, for the life he'd never let himself imagine. As the sun set, Jamie looked at him, his expression serious. Elias, what's holding you back? You're here. You're curious. What's stopping you from stepping into this? Elias's mouth went dry. He wanted to say it, the truth he'd buried for 40 years, but fear still clawed at him. I don't know how, he admitted finally, his voice breaking. Jamie's hand found his, a brief, warm touch. You don't have to know. You just have to try. That night, Elias lay awake, his father's urn on the nightstand. He thought of Jamie's hand, of Clara's words, of the Castro's vibrant pulse. For the first time, he let himself imagine a life where he wasn't silent, where he loved without shame. It terrified him, but it also felt like freedom. Elias woke to the sound of rain tapping against his window, the San Francisco sky gray and heavy. He felt different today, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or retreat. Jamie's words from yesterday, you just have to try, had rooted themselves in his heart, refusing to let go. He spent the morning sorting through his father's belongings, a task he'd avoided since the funeral. In a box of old papers, he found a letter in Harold's jagged handwriting, addressed to him. His hands trembled as he opened it. Eli, it began, I ain't good with words, but I see you. Always have. Don't let the world make you small. Elias's vision blurred with tears. His father had known, had seen him, and hadn't turned away. The realization cracked something open inside him, a flood of grief and relief. That afternoon, Elias returned to the Castro, drawn by an urge he couldn't name. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. He found Jamie at a small cafe, laughing with a group of friends. When Jamie saw him, his face lit up. Elias, come join us. Elias hesitated, feeling out of place, but Jamie's friends welcomed him with easy smiles. They were a mix of ages, backgrounds, and stories. A drag performer named Sasha, a trans teacher named Leo, a lesbian couple who ran a bakery. For the first time, Elias felt like he belonged. As the group chatted, Elias listened, soaking in their stories of love, struggle, and joy. Sasha talked about her first performance, how the stage had set her free. Leo shared how coming out to his students had been terrifying but empowering. Elias stayed quiet, but their openness stirred something in him. When Jamie asked, "What about you, Elias? What's your story?" the table went silent, all eyes on him. His heart pounded. He could lie, deflect, keep the silence he'd worn like armor. But his father's letter burned in his pocket, and Jamie's steady gaze anchored him. I came out to my mom when I was 17, he said, his voice shaking. She collapsed. Said I'd kill her if I lived like that. So I didn't. For 40 years. The words spilled out, raw and heavy, and the table was quiet, not with judgment, but with understanding. Sasha reached across, squeezing his hand. That's a hell of a weight to carry, honey. Leo nodded. But you're here now. That's what matters. Elias's throat tightened, and he looked at Jamie, whose eyes were soft with pride. You did it, Jamie whispered later as they left the cafe. You told your truth. Elias managed a shaky smile. First time since I was a kid. Over the next few days, Elias and Jamie grew closer. They met for coffee, walked the city, talked about everything and nothing. Jamie shared his dreams of opening his own funeral home, one that celebrated lives rather than mourned them. Elias found himself opening up, telling Jamie about his years as a teacher, the students he'd inspired, the life he'd lived in the margins. With Jamie, he felt seen, not as the son who'd failed his mother, but as a man with a story worth telling. One evening, they ended up at Ocean Beach, the waves crashing under a starry sky. Jamie kicked off his shoes, running toward the water with a laugh. "Come on, Elias," he called. Elias hesitated, then followed, the cold sand grounding him. They stood at the edge of the surf, the wind sharp against their faces. "I used to come here when I was figuring myself out," Jamie said. "The ocean doesn't judge. It just is." Elias stared at the waves, feeling their rhythm in his chest. "I wish I'd had a place like this," he said. Jamie looked at him, his voice soft. "You do now?" As they walked back to the car, Jamie's hand brushed Elias's, and this time, Elias didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together, tentative but sure, and Elias's heart raced, not with fear, but with a joy he'd forgotten was possible. For the first time in 40 years, he felt alive. Back at home, Elias pulled out his father's letter again, reading it by lamplight. "Don't let the world make you small." He thought of Jamie, of the Castro, of the people who'd welcomed him without question. He thought of his mother, her fear, her collapse, and for the first time, he didn't feel guilt. He felt pity, for her, for the life she'd limited by her own fears. He wasn't that 17-year-old boy anymore. He was ready to live. Elias stood in his classroom, chalk dust on his fingers, as his students filed out for the day. It was his last week before retirement, and the weight of it settled over him like a heavy coat. For 35 years, he'd taught history, shaping young minds while hiding his own story. But today, he felt different, lighter, as if the truth he'd shared in the Castro had loosened the chains around his heart. He'd been texting Jamie all week, their conversations a mix of playful banter and quiet confessions. Jamie had invited him to a Pride event that weekend, a small gathering at a community center. "Nothing big," Jamie had said. "Just good people, good music. You'll fit right in." Elias wanted to go, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd spent so long on the sidelines. Could he really step into this world now? That evening, he met Clara for dinner at a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown. As they shared dumplings, she noticed the change in him. "You're smiling more," she said, dipping a shrimp roll in soy sauce. "Is it that guy from the funeral home?" Elias's face warmed, and he busied himself with his chopsticks. "Jamie's different," he admitted. "He makes me feel like I can be myself." Clara's eyes softened. "Then don't let that go, Eli. You deserve it." On Saturday, Elias arrived at the community center, his palms sweaty. The room was alive with color, rainbow banners, laughter, music pulsing through the air. Jamie spotted him immediately, weaving through the crowd with a grin. "You came," he said, pulling Elias into a quick hug. The warmth of it steadied Elias, and he followed Jamie into the heart of the event. People danced, shared stories, celebrated love in all its forms. Elias felt like an outsider looking in, but Jamie stayed close, introducing him to friends, making him feel included. As the night wore on, a drag queen took the stage, her performance fierce and unapologetic. Elias watched, mesmerized, as she commanded the room. Jamie leaned in, his breath warm against Elias's ear. "That's what freedom looks like," he said. Elias nodded, his chest tight with longing. He wanted that freedom, that boldness, but the weight of 40 years still lingered. Later, they stepped outside for air, the city lights glittering around them. Jamie's voice was soft. "You're doing great, you know. Showing up here, it's a big deal." Elias looked at him, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I'm scared, Jamie. I've spent my whole life hiding. What if I'm too old to change?" Jamie's eyes held his, steady and sure. "You're not too old to live, Elias. You're just starting." The words hit hard, and Elias felt tears prick his eyes. He thought of his father's letter, of Clara's encouragement, of the boy he'd been at 17, so full of hope before his mother's collapse had silenced him. Jamie reached for his hand, and this time, Elias held on tight, letting the warmth ground him. They stood there, the city humming around them, and Elias felt a spark of courage he hadn't known he had. The next day, Elias visited his mother's grave, a small plot in Calma. He hadn't been there in years, but today, he needed to face her. Kneeling by the headstone, he spoke softly. "I'm sorry you couldn't accept me, Mom, but I can't keep apologizing for who I am. The words felt like a release, a farewell to the guilt he'd carried. As he stood, the wind carried a sense of peace, as if the past was finally letting him go. That evening, Jamie invited Elias to his apartment for dinner. It was a small, cozy space filled with books and plants, a reflection of Jamie's vibrant spirit. Over homemade tacos, they talked about their dreams, Jamie's vision for his funeral home, Elias's hope to travel, to see the world as his true self. As they cleared the dishes, their hands brushed, and Jamie paused, his eyes searching Elias's. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice soft but bold. Elias's heart raced, fear and desire warring inside him. He nodded, and Jamie's lips met his, gentle but sure. The kiss was a revelation, a reclaiming of something Elias had denied himself for decades. When they pulled apart, Elias was trembling, but he was smiling. "I didn't know it could feel like this," he whispered. Jamie's grin was radiant. "It's just the beginning." As Elias drove home, the city lights blurred through his tears, not of sadness, but of joy. He was 60, but he felt reborn, ready to embrace the life he'd always wanted. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Don't let the world make you small." For the first time, Elias believed he could be big, bold, and free. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Elias hadn't dared to imagine. He and Jamie grew closer, their days filled with small adventures, hikes in Marin, brunches in the Mission, quiet evenings watching old movies. With Jamie, Elias discovered parts of himself he'd buried: his love for jazz, his curiosity about the world, his capacity for joy. But the fear still lingered, a shadow that whispered he was too old, too broken, to deserve this happiness. At school, Elias's students noticed the change. "You're happier, Mr. Carter," one said during his final week. "Like you're in love or something." The class laughed, but Elias just smiled, his heart full. He didn't tell them about Jamie, not yet, but he felt the urge to share his truth, to stop hiding. On his last day, he stood before his students, his voice steady. "History teaches us that courage changes everything," he said. "Don't be afraid to be who you are." The words were for them, but also for himself. Clara invited Elias and Jamie to dinner with her family, a test of sorts. Her husband, Mark, and their teenage kids were warm but curious, asking Jamie about his work, his life. Elias watched, nervous but proud, as Jamie charmed them with his easy laugh and quick wit. Later, Clara pulled Elias aside. "He's good for you," she said. "You're finally you." Elias hugged her, tears in his eyes. "I'm trying," he said. But not everyone was as accepting. At a neighborhood barbecue, an old friend of Harold's, Tom, cornered Elias. "Heard you're hanging out in the Castro," Tom said, his tone sharp. "Didn't think you were one of them." The words stung, echoing his mother's rejection, but Elias stood tall. "I am," he said simply, "and I'm done hiding it." Tom walked away, muttering, but Elias felt a surge of pride. He'd spoken his truth, and it hadn't broken him. One evening, Jamie took Elias to a support group for older queer adults. The room was filled with people like him, men and women who'd hidden for years, who'd faced rejection, who were now reclaiming their lives. Elias listened as a woman named Ruth shared her story of coming out at 55, her voice steady with resolve. "I thought it was too late," she said. "But it's never too late to live." Elias felt a lump in his throat. He hadn't planned to speak, but when it was his turn, he found himself standing. "I'm Elias," he began, his voice trembling. "I came out to my mom when I was 17, and she collapsed. I stayed silent for 40 years because I thought it would keep her alive. But it killed me instead." The room was quiet, every face turned toward him. "Now, I'm 60, and I'm finally learning to live. Because of people like you. Because of someone who showed me it's okay to try." He looked at Jamie, who was beaming, tears in his eyes. After the meeting, Jamie pulled him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. Elias held him tight, feeling the weight of decades lift. They walked home under the stars, hand in hand, the city alive around them. For the first time, Elias didn't care who saw. He was done shrinking. But the past wasn't done with him. A letter arrived from his cousin, Marie, who'd been at the funeral. She'd heard about his new lifestyle, and wrote to say she was praying for him, that he could still be saved. The words cut deep, stirring old wounds. Elias showed the letter to Jamie, expecting anger, but Jamie just shook his head. "She's scared," he said. "That's her burden, not yours." Elias nodded, but the doubt crept back. Was he betraying his family by living this truth? That night, he dreamed of his mother, her face pale and accusing. He woke in a cold sweat, his heart racing. Jamie, who'd stayed over, stirred beside him. "Bad dream?" he asked, his voice soft. Elias nodded, unable to speak. Jamie pulled him close, his warmth a balm. "You're not alone anymore," he said. Elias clung to him, letting the words anchor him. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next morning, Elias wrote back to Marie, his pen steady. "I'm happy, Marie. For the first time in my life. I hope you can understand that someday." He mailed the letter, feeling a sense of closure. The past couldn't hold him anymore. He was ready to move forward, with Jamie, with himself, with the life he was building. Elias's retirement party was small but warm, held at Clara's house with colleagues, students, and Jamie by his side. The room buzzed with laughter and stories, but Elias felt a quiet pride as he looked around. He'd spent his career teaching others to question, to seek truth, and now he was living that lesson. Jamie squeezed his hand under the table, a silent reminder of how far he'd come. After the party, they walked through Golden Gate Park, the air crisp with autumn. Jamie talked about his plans for the funeral home, his vision for a space that honored every life, no matter who they loved. Elias listened, inspired by his passion. "What about you?" Jamie asked. "What's next for Elias Carter?" Elias paused, the question heavy. For so long, his life had been about duty, to his mother, his students, his silence. Now he had a chance to choose. "I want to travel," he said finally. "See the world. Maybe write about it." Jamie's eyes lit up. "Then let's do it. Start small. Maybe a road trip up the coast." Elias laughed, the idea sparking something in him. "You'd come with me?" Jamie grinned. "Try stopping me." They planned the trip over the next week, mapping out a route to Oregon, Washington, maybe even Canada. Elias felt like a kid again, dreaming of adventure. But as the departure date neared, old fears resurfaced. What if he wasn't enough for Jamie? What if the world wasn't as accepting as the Castro? He confided in Clara, who listened patiently. "You're not that scared kid anymore," she said. "You've got Jamie, you've got me, and you've got yourself. That's enough." The road trip began on a crisp October morning, the Pacific Coast Highway stretching before them. Jamie drove, singing off-key to a playlist of 80s hits, while Elias laughed, the wind in his hair. They stopped at small towns, hiked cliffs overlooking the ocean, shared quiet moments in diners. In a seaside motel in Oregon, they made love for the first time, and Elias felt a freedom he'd never known. Jamie's touch was gentle, reverent, and Elias realized he wasn't just falling in love. He was falling into himself. But the trip wasn't without challenges. In a small Washington town, a diner owner refused to serve them after Jamie kissed Elias's cheek. The rejection stung, a reminder of the world's cruelty, but Jamie just took Elias's hand and let him out. "Their loss," he said, and they found another diner, one filled with warmth and laughter. Elias marveled at Jamie's resilience, his refusal to let hate dim his light. He wanted to be like that, to carry his truth with pride. One night, under a sky full of stars, Elias told Jamie about his mother's collapse, the full story, how he'd blamed himself, how he'd vowed never to hurt her again. Jamie listened, his hand steady in Elias's. "You didn't break her," he said. "Her fear did, and you're not responsible for that." Elias nodded, tears streaming down his face. For the first time, he believed it. When they returned to San Francisco, Elias felt changed, like a man who'd shed his old skin. He started writing, a memoir of his journey from silence to freedom. The words poured out, raw and honest, a testament to the life he was building. Jamie read the pages, his eyes shining. "This is you," he said. "This is your truth." Elias kissed him, grateful for the man who'd helped him find it. But the past wasn't done. A call came from Tom, the family friend who'd judged him at the barbecue. "I owe you an apology," Tom said, his voice gruff. "I didn't get it before, but I'm trying." Elias was stunned, his heart softening. "Thanks, Tom," he said. "That means a lot. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a sign that the world could change, even if slowly." As winter approached, Elias and Jamie planned their next adventure, a trip to Europe. Elias felt a thrill at the thought, a life unfolding before him. He was 60, but he was just beginning. The silence was gone, replaced by a voice he was learning to love. Elias stood on a cliff in Big Sur, the Pacific crashing below, Jamie's hand in his. It was a year since his father's funeral, a year since he'd begun to reclaim his life. The wind carried the scent of salt and freedom, and Elias felt a peace he'd never known. He was no longer the boy who'd silenced himself for his mother's sake, nor the man who'd lived in shadows. He was Elias Carter, whole and unapologetic. Back in San Francisco, his memoir was taking shape, each chapter a step toward healing. He wrote about his mother's collapse, his father's quiet love, the decades of silence, and the joy he'd found with Jamie. He read passages to the support group, their encouragement fueling him. Ruth, the woman who'd spoken of living at 55, told him, "Your story's going to help someone, Elias. Maybe a lot of someone's." He hoped so. Jamie's funeral home project was moving forward, too. He'd secured a space in the Castro, a small building he planned to transform into a place of celebration. Elias helped where he could, painting walls, sorting paperwork, marveling at Jamie's vision. They were building a life together, one rooted in love and authenticity. One evening, Clara invited them to her kids' school play, a modern retelling of Romeo and Juliet with a queer twist. As Elias watched the young actors embrace their roles, he thought of his own journey, the love he'd found against the odds. After the play, Clara's daughter, Mia, hugged him. "I'm proud of you, Uncle Eli," she said. "You're brave." Elias's eyes welled up. Brave. He was starting to believe it. The past still surfaced sometimes. A distant relative sent a cold email, accusing Elias of dishonoring his parents. But this time, he didn't flinch. He wrote back, "I'm living the life they wanted for me, one where I'm happy." He meant it. His mother's fear, his father's silence, were part of his story, but they no longer defined him. On the anniversary of his father's death, Elias and Jamie scattered Harold's ashes at Ocean Beach, the place where Elias had first felt free. As the waves carried the ashes away, Elias spoke to his father, his voice steady. "I'm living, Dad, like you wanted." Jamie squeezed his hand, and they stood together, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. That night, they hosted a small gathering at Jamie's apartment, filled with friends from the Castro, the support group, and Clara's family. The room was alive with laughter, music, and stories. Elias looked around, his heart full. This was his community, his home. He'd spent 40 years silent, but now, at 61, he was speaking, loving, living. As the party wound down, Jamie pulled Elias onto the balcony. The city sparkled below, a tapestry of light and life. "I love you," Jamie said, his voice soft but sure. Elias's breath caught. He'd never heard those words, not like this. "I love you too," he said, and the truth of it settled into his bones. They kissed, the world falling away, and Elias knew this was his happy ending, not an end, but a beginning. He thought of his father's letter, of the words that had set him free. "Don't let the world make you small." He hadn't. He'd grown, expanded, become the man he was always meant to be. The silence was gone, replaced by a life vibrant with love, courage, and truth. Elias Carter was free, and he would never go back.